So before we jump into the training, I just wanted to look at the brief as far as what are we trying to create. As I stated in the previous video, the introduction, I believe when you're trying to train somebody on any type of application, if you don't have a need or a purpose or an end game, that training becomes forgettable or unfocused because they won't use it. So let's look at what the brief is. So the brief was the 2-week team rota. And when I thought about this 2-week rota, I thought about initially the starting point of the conversation was the ability to reliably print the 2-week rota off for the team and then put it on the notice board at the veterinary practice. But then there's certain things that needed to support that. So if I go through the 5 tabs on the workbook that I've created and briefly go through what their individual purpose is and what the aims are. So when we look at the visual of the 2-week team rota, I need to be able to print it. And when I'm printing this 2-week rota, I wanted to see my whole team's allocations for a rolling 2-week period on an A4 piece of paper. I wanted that print to be dynamic. I wanted it to automatically pick up the team members as they were added, and also I wanted it to be time sensitive, so it displayed the appropriate data, referenced the time period that I'd selected. I wanted all row and column headings to be visible. I didn't want to mess around with trying to get row and columns appearing if my print went over more than one page. And I wanted people to understand that information, so I needed to display a key as well if it printed over on one page or multiple pages, so people knew what they were looking at. And also I believe it's best practice to show what the purpose of that print is. I give it a meaningful title, but also to show where's that data coming from, what file was that print based on, so what's the source. So I think it's always good practice to show what source that print is coming from. As far as the 2-week rota visual, so this is an interactive visual that's based on data that I'm mentioning on the team rota. And as far as this visual is concerned, again, I wanted to see the whole team's allocations on a rolling 2-week period. It needed to be dynamic and automatically pick up team members as I add them, their data to this spreadsheet. And also I wanted it to be time sensitive as I scroll through those periods within this interactive visual. I need to see the team's allocations versus their capacity and skill set to guard against over allocation while ensuring I've got appropriate coverage at the veterinary practice. In other words, if I haven't got enough vets or enough nurses ratio, then potentially I won't be able to run the practice in accordance with regulations, for example. And I wanted to see where I've made errors, because when you're entering the team rota data, you are going to make errors. You know, it's all part of being human. So I wanted to see very clearly where those errors were, so I could then go and correct them before I printed the team rota. Now this is where I need somewhere to enter that team rota data based on a single day or across a date range. Now, the things that I wanted here is I wanted to be able to enter those planned activities that drive the 2-week rota visual, and I also needed some basic checks as I was entering that data, just to ensure that when I'm allocating work, I'm not over allocating against their contracted weekly hours, so I can do a basic check. I needed to enter different activities, so not just when they were working, but when they were on vacation, for example, that would be picked up by that 2-week rota visual automatically. And all this needs to be based on the active 2-week period. So as I scroll through that visual, it then picks up the relevant data automatically, or it's time sensitive. Now, as far as the team data, this is where I need somewhere to define the team, who's on my team. And the things that I'd got in here as far as the asks were, is I needed to control who is in the team, which then drives that dynamic visual and also the print preview as well, the print as well. I needed to capture their skill sets to support that 2-week Rota visual, and I needed to reference their contracted working hours. I needed to state what their contracted hours were, weekly contracted hours, in order to do those basic checks when I'm entering that data. And also when I'm looking at the visual, I can see that I'm not over allocating that team based on their available hours. So I needed somewhere to put what those contracted hours were, and this was the place. And then finally, the static data. So as far as the static data is concerned, static data is exactly what it means. It shouldn't change normally. You know, the area that I'm going to be making the amendments are going to be within the team as I'm adding team members, and also as far as the team Rota when I'm building the team Rota and work allocations. But this should stay pretty static. Therefore, that's why I call it static data. But the key things here is that I needed somewhere where I could control the drop downs in the team table, reference the skill sets to promote consistency and avoid typos or manual errors. I needed reference data to control and support calculated columns in the Rota data table, and I wanted somewhere to control and adjust the starting period of the 2-week Rota visual and print. So that's the overview, that's the brief. In this training session, we are going to focus on static data. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, I have a blank Excel workbook, and this is Excel from Office 365. So first of all, I'm going to create some tabs. So first tab I'm going to require is something to hold my static data. Then I want something to hold my team data, so who's in the team. Rename that tab to team. Then I want another tab for my Rota data, so I'm going to rename this to Rota data. And then finally, my actual visual Rota that I want to be able to look at and print off. Let's rename that to 2-week Rota. So let me first of all get into the static data. So let me take a moment to describe some basic layouts here on the Excel view here on the home ribbon. So firstly, some of the things I'm going to be using on here. So here you can see you've got the font. So this is for any text that you put into the cells. This is the font, and this is the font size, whether it's bold, italic or underlined. Here, this is where we use to put borders on our cells. As far as the formatting, we can fill our cell with a color, and we can change the color of our font also here. We can also change the alignment of our font. So for example, we can centralize it, we can move it to the left or align it to the right, etc. Moving over, we can merge cells, so we can select multiple cells and merge them and center them, and we can wrap text within those cells. Over here is the format of the cell that's selected, or cells, or range of cells, and this is where you can select whether it's a date or whether it's a number or whether it's just a general, or it's a mix. And then over here you can see some templates as far as formatting the cells, which I'll also use these a lot as we are going along here. Hopefully that makes it clear as I'm selecting these things. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is say, well, when does my rota start from when I'm visually looking at it? So I'm going to put a start date. Yeah, like so. This is on the home ribbon, I can see that this is a general. So, but on here, I want this to be my actual date. So I'm going to do the drop down and set that as a short date. So let's put the 23rd of October 2023. And then here, I want this to be, I want to see the day of the week to make sure that I'm always putting a Monday start date in here. So I'm going to put day here, and I'm going to use a formula. So in this formula, I'm going to use weekday formula, and we are going to derive that from the actual date that we put in here. So I'm going to go equals, stop, weekday. The serial number is going to be the date. Then the return type is, I have a number of options here, which basically says, well, what starts the week, which day, and also what's the numbering system we're going to use. So when does the numbering system start from? So I'm going to use number 3 here. So our week starts on a Monday, and a Monday starts with 0, Tuesday 1 through to Sunday, which is a 6. So I'm going to select number 3, and then I'm going to close like so. So I've now got my dates here. Now, I need to be able to do something with that, so I'm then going to create my first list of values that I want to refer to. So first of all, it's going to be days of week, what the long code of that is, and what the short code of that is. Let's expand that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter 0, 1, and if I take that all the way down to 6, then the long associated long day is going to be Monday. And again, I should be able to just drag that down as a series down to Sunday. And then I'm going to put short code in, so it's going to be M for Monday to U for Tuesday. I'm going to do as you can see, it's starting to predict Thursday. Yeah, I'm happy with that. And there you go. So I've now got my days here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this into a table. So I'm going to select anywhere within this data and do Control T. And there's my dialog box. So there's the range. And I'm going to say my table does have headers. So I'm going to click OK. I'm then going to give this table a meaningful name. So on the table design ribbon, with the table selected, I'm just going to put table days of week, like so. Now that I've done that, I can add something else to this formula. Now what I'm going to use is a VLOOKUP. So a VLOOKUP is equals VLOOKUP, then the value. So at the moment, if I put a 0 there as the value that I'm looking up, I do comma. The table array is going to be this table here. So if I start typing my table name, there it is, weeks, that table days of the week. and then the column is going to be column 2, so 1, 2. So I'm going to pick up column 2, and I want it to be an exact match. And if I do close bracket, so now if I change that to a 1, the value it's looking up, do 1, it then picks up the Tuesday. So all I've got to do to get that number, instead of me manually typing it in, I'm going to take the number that's created based on this weekday. So if I take that formula there and do control copy and go into here and replace that 1 there, and I do control V and paste that in and hit return, you can now see that that is picking up the Monday from that table. So I'm just going to copy that formula from within the formula bar, then on here I'm just going to paste that in there like so. So when I change the date here now and I do the 24th, for example, it will automatically pick up the day of the week based on the days using a VLOOKUP. So let me set that back to the 23rd. And the reason why I like to use tables for, instead of manually selecting a range, is that if I add more information to that table, it will automatically be included in that range. So tables, I'm a massive fan of within Excel. The next table that I'm going to create is I want to put the types of scheduled work. So, you know, are they working? Is it unplanned leave? Is it vacation? So what the short codes of those are. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put types and do a short code for those types. And again, in here, I'm just going to put, for example, not scheduled. And then I'm going to put N/S as the short code. So before I carry on putting any more values in here, is just to demonstrate how this works. Is if I create a data validation where I want to create that drop down format within any of my lists or user data entry. So if I just put list demo so I know where I'm doing it, and if I go into this and I do data validation, I do list and I choose my range. So let's say we'll just choose that there like so and do return and then click OK. As you can see, not scheduled. Now if I add unplanned leave and then put an A in there and return, that looks a bit bigger. If I do the drop down, it's there because remember I selected these two. But if I add another value in here, so if I do vacation, like so, and I do the drop down, it's not picked up that vacation. It means I've got to keep going into that data validation and expanding the selection area. However, I cancel that, and if I then go into, if I do Control T to turn this to a table, and this it has headers, do OK, and again I'm going to give this a meaningful name. So again, click inside the table, table design, and I'm going to call this types of activity. Yeah, and return. So that now is something meaningful. Now, if I do a equals table, there's my activity. I do an open bracket to choose the column, and it's going to be types, like so. You then can see that's what it picks up. So you think that was good, wouldn't you? So if I take this now and do Control Copy just going to delete that there. If I go into this cell again and do data validation, so the data ribbon and then data validation, and replace this with that formula and do OK, I get an error message. And the reason why I'm getting an error message is that it doesn't like us putting a table reference in here. So what I'm going to do is, to cheat a little bit, is I'm going to use the indirect formula. Now the indirect function takes whatever text you put in there and turns it into a cell reference or a range. So if I do indirect open bracket, and then I do a quotation mark, an open quotation mark, and then after the table reference do a close quotation mark and close bracket, and then click OK, it's fine. And if I do the drop down, you can see it's picked everything up. So if I add more values to this now, so type in working and do X as a shortcode, and if I press tab, it'll then create the next row. If I do out office, and again, and tab. If I go to here and do the drop down, you can see it's picked all those things up for us. Oh, a bit of a typo there, so let's just change that. Out of, there we go. It's all fine. So that's why I think tables are brilliant, and I use them for the data validation. So let me just delete delete that, and let's get rid of this here on data validation and clear all. Done. Right, so the next table that I want, so I've got my week starting date that I can reference. I've got it telling me what day of the month is. I've got my days of the week here. I've got my activity types. So now I want to know skill sets. So I'm going to do a single comma skill set, or I can call it capability. Now this is where I'm going to enter my information as far as the skill sets. Now a veterinary office with veterinary staff, so forgive me if I get this wrong. Those are veterinary professionals out there. So I'm going to type in different skill sets. So I'm going to go nurse. Again, I'm just going to do Control T. And my table does have headers. I'm going to click OK. And then what I want to do is give it a meaningful name. So in table design, I'm going to call it skill sets and return. And now if I just expand that, if I tab, I'm going to do a nurse. And the reason why I'm putting a nurse at the start is I want to be able to organize information in my Rota and group it via the different skills. So I'm always going to put the main skill at the front of the description. So this is nurse junior, and I'm going to do nurse senior. So when it sorts information, it first groups it by the main skill and then their level of seniority. So let me put some other things in here. So I'm going to do vet, same thing, vet junior, typing. I'll just carry on into the rest of the skills in here. And there you go, all entered. If I just sort this table, so if I go onto the data here with the table selected and just do sort ascending, and there you go, it's sorted everything for me. I'm just going to get rid of this row here. So whenever you're deleting rows in a table, or you don't delete it here by selecting the row and then hitting and then deleting. You do it by right clicking in the table on the row that you want to delete. So I'm going to right click and do delete table row, and it's gone. Same, let's clean this one up here, get rid of this row, delete row, and you can do the same for columns as well. So I've now got my skill sets. So I think the final thing that I want, in fact there's two things I want. I want to be able to sort my 2-week rota by name and skill. So for example, if I want to show the rota and sorted by names as a default, but then if I want to sort it by skill then name, so I want to create those two drop down options. So I'm going to create sort by, I'm going to do name, and I'm going to do skill. Again, Control T to table, and I'm going to change this to table sort by. It's always good to give your tables names so they're meaningful when you're looking for information in them. And then finally, I'm going to do hours of the day. So this is AM, how many hours AM, and how many hours PM. So I know when I'm allocating to AM and PM, I know what that represents in hours. So if I go to here and I type period of day, do hours, and again I'm going to make this a number in here, so default is number. So I'm going to do AM, and that's going to be 4 hours, and I'm going to do PM, and that's going to be 3.5 hours based on a 37.5 hour week, so 3.5 hours. Again, Control T, table as headers, and again I'm going to give this a meaningful name in my table design. So table name AM underscore PM hours, and there you go. So I now know what that is. I think that's all the data that I'm going to want in here. All I'm going to do is make this look a little bit different. I'm going to format this, so let's make that like so. I want that to be, let me use that format there. I'm going to again check cell, and that's a calculated cell. I don't like these double lines, etc. So I'm going to highlight them all, and here on the home ribbon I'm just going to make those all thin border lines like so. I think that's all the data that I need within my static data, and I'm just so it looks nice, I'm just going to go view, and I'm going to remove the grid line, so I'm only seeing the information and the formatting like so. So now I've got my static data, I'm going to save my file, and it's always important to save your file. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to put it in, choose a folder, work training Excel. I'm going to call this 2-week team Rota, like so. I'm going to hit save. So let's recap. We have used both the weekday and VLOOKUP functions for our start dates, which helps us identify the day of the week based on the date that we've entered in our start date. We've also created the days of the week table, which supports date-related VLOOKUPs. For example, our start date uses this table to identify the day of the week. We've also created our types of activity, which supports our data validation drop-downs within what will be our Rota data entry table. We've also created our skill sets table, which supports our data validation drop-downs, specifically within our team table when we create it, and also our Rota data entry table. We've also created our sort by table, which supports our data validation drop-downs for the 2-week visual sort by capability. And finally, we have created our AM and PM hours table, which supports our data calculations within our 2-week visual and also our Rota data entry table. So that is the end of our training video on static data. I hope you've learnt something new about Excel, and I hope to see you soon for our next video, which we will look at building our team table, and we'll also build our Rota entry table and also put some calculations within that table utilizing the static data that we've created. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you soon for our next in this Excel training series. Bye bye now.